Okay, and aloha, welcome to the show, and I'm sorry for the replay, and I hope you haven't already switched off and gone over to some other radio show. This is Wednesday, February 10th, 2016. It's a live show. We had some technical issues that prevented us from being live at the proper start of our show, but we're live now. Please don't go away. We're not repeating something from somewhere else. All right, so the phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room. We got a caller waiting on the line right now. Obviously, the big news is the New Hampshire primary, where Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump just came out way, way ahead. The political establishment is very rattled about what's going on. The GOP cannot seem to stop Donald Trump here. And we're already seeing the corporate media whining, about, it's over at the Huffington Post, they're saying, New Hampshire went racist, sexist, and xenophobic. Over at the Washington Examiner, they're saying radical New Hampshire chooses Trump and Sanders. So they're already bashing New Hampshire for expressing their will at the ballot box here. And story coming out of the National Review saying, could this New Hampshire debacle been any worse for Donald Trump's foes? Yeah, he could have gotten like 90% instead of what he did get. But it's very upsetting to everybody. And what's going on over at Huffington Post and the other corporate established media, they make a huge amount of money by selling the ability to tell Americans what to think and what to do. And very clearly, with all the attacks on Bernie Sanders and the constant propping up of Hillary Clinton and the attacks on Donald Trump and pushing Jeb Bush. I mean, Fox News yesterday was saying, Jeb Bush is going to reset and he's going to have momentum coming out of New Hampshire. And he finished in the single digits again. The corporate media understands they have lost control of your minds. And they are going out of their minds as a result. Because when their corporate owners realize that all those millions of dollars going into keeping these media outlets running and the $1 million salaries going to the talking heads aren't buying the opinion of the public anymore, the party is over. And it already is here. Now, we are hearing from CNN and Fox that Chris Christie is going to drop out of the presidential race. He did not do very good, but he's still angling for being considered as somebody's vice president. And the media is still on the attack against Donald Trump. Apparently on Monday, a woman attending Donald Trump's rally shouted out an insult, and nobody heard her, so Trump repeated it, and the media went ballistic. How dare he use this word? It's out there, the politically correct, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, one of the reasons people like Donald Trump is he's not politically correct. He said flat out, we don't have time to waste to be politically correct anymore. We've got things that we need to deal with. Now then, there is a very unpleasant reality coming out of New Hampshire. And that is that even though Bernie Sanders trounced Hillary in the popular vote, Hillary Clinton is actually getting more delegates from New Hampshire than Bernie Sanders is because of the superdelegates. Remember I told you those were Hillary's ace in the hole. The superdelegates don't have to be assigned to any voters or whatnot, and there are 6 superdelegates in New Hampshire, and all 6 went to Hillary Clinton. So as of the most recent count, Hillary Clinton has 15 delegates out of New Hampshire, and Bernie Sanders 13 in an election that he clearly won. And it is a reminder that the Democratic establishment, and let's be honest, the Republican establishment, don't really care what you want. They are going to decide, you will have this candidate, you will have Hillary, you will have Jeb Bush. And, yeah, the situation here is the American people need to wake up and realize they've lost control of their own country. These parties that many Americans, not all, many Americans are signed up with, will take their money and their votes when useful and otherwise ignore them. Now, filmmaker Annabelle Park is out there saying that supporting your candidates isn't enough this year. We have to start challenging those superdelegates because they will steal the nomination for the anointed elites, Hillary Clinton first and foremost, And do you know that Hillary Clinton is the first U.S. presidential candidate campaigning while under an active FBI criminal investigation? It really is out of control. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Jeff in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Going fine.
Mike, yeah, I just wanted to talk about New Hampshire, obviously. And I was very impressed with both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, both the margin of victory, but also the fact that they seemingly won every kind of voting block you can think of.
Oh, absolutely. Bernie swept all the demographics. Hillary lost in every demographic, and still, somehow, because of party politics, she got more delegates out of New Hampshire than Bernie Sanders did. If that doesn't tell you the whole system is crooked, nothing ever will. Jeff, we need to take a break for commercials. Stay on the line. I'm going to come back to you after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go back to Jeff in Canada. You were talking about Donald Trump and events in New Hampshire.
Yeah, Mike. In the Republican side, I was watching the CNN this morning, just see what the bad guys are up to, the media there, and they were all sort of crapping their pants about the establishment have all severed their votes and broke them up, and it's because Bush, Kasich, Cruz, and Rubio are all getting 11-12%. If a couple of them drop out, then they have a better chance of defeating Trump. So it's like they were thinking out loud about, should they maybe force one another to back out or whatever? So I think in the next couple of weeks, you might see some behind-the-scenes, play that way to have a couple of the other candidates maybe drop out if they're offered up sort of a proposition.
Yeah, they'll do that, and their goal is going to be to somehow deny Trump a majority of delegates so that they can do what is called a brokered convention, where they go on in and say, well, let's forget about what the voters wanted because the voters couldn't come up with a clear mandate, and we're going to run the guy we think is best equipped to defeat Hillary Clinton, of which none of them are except Donald Trump. I mean, if you look at their performance in the election so far, none of the candidates other than Trump stands a chance if Hillary is successfully implanted as the Democratic nominee.
And they're trying it on that side, too. I can remember back in 2008, the last time Hillary ran for president, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe the superdelegates didn't come out for Obama until much later in the process. And this is for all 6 of the New Hampshire superdelegates to go to Hillary Clinton. I mean,
well, this all goes back to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I mean, Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the head of the Democratic Party, and she has made it very clear since this whole began. She wants Hillary in the White House. And all of the superdelegates all across the country are already committed to Hillary. That's her ace in the hole. And we're going to have to put Sanders ahead by such a huge margin that even the superdelegates can't reverse it, like they just did in New Hampshire.
Well, that's why I think their plan B is that Hillary's got all this spotlight on her with her criminal activity and the fact that she's not doing very well against Bernie Sanders. I think there's talk about maybe the Vice President Biden coming in or John Kerry or something like that to step in for Hillary, because if she keeps like this, I mean, the superdelegates are going to have to go to Sanders because it's going to look so bad.
Well, it's already looking really, really bad, and what's going to happen is you're going to find Democratic voters are just going to quit and change their party affiliation. Because if they're getting the message that what they vote for in the primaries doesn't mean anything because it's going to be stolen for Hillary anyway, they might as well change party affiliation and start voting Republican.
Well, the opposite thing happened in Britain where a lot more Labour supporters came back to the Labour Party after they nominated Jeremy Corbyn because he was so overwhelmingly supported by the people there. So if they do this, it's like putting a gun to their head. So I don't see how this could possibly work out. I don't really know. Obviously, they're trying to protect their little racket there, but I mean, they've got to come to the situation where it's like, we've got to let Bernie in because if he keeps, he's beating women, he's beating youngsters, he goes across different spectrums of race, everything. Hillary just is losing everywhere.
Going into the primary yesterday, the pollsters were saying Hillary was losing every demographic voting block except the people earning more than $200,000 a year and the 65 and older. But by the time the election was over, she'd lost those as well. She lost every single demographic block that was up there in New Hampshire, and still, because of party machinery, she's got 2 more delegates out of New Hampshire than Bernie Sanders did. And this is going to infuriate Democratic voters. because they're being told what you want doesn't matter, and there will be a reaction. There's a lot of months yet to go between now and the general election in November. And if the Democrats go on angering their own voter base like this, they're going to discover they don't have a voter base when that general election happens. And personally, I don't think that you're going to be able to get all the way to November without this private email server spy scandal exploding into public view.
Well, I don't know what your opinion is, Michael, but, I mean, if they really tried us against Bernie Sanders because he is that popular, I mean, it's going to hit the fan. I mean, because I don't think people are sophisticated at this point, at least the general voter, to realize the super delicate situation there. I think they just see the vote and think, Bernie Sanders is ahead, because it's not really on the media, the mainstream media anyway, about the super delegates all going to Hillary Clinton. And for all those super delegates to go to Hillary Clinton, which she lost by 22 points, that should say a lot to people right there.
Well, that's why the independent media has to focus on that story, because, Democratic voters need to understand their Democratic Party leadership is basically saying, to heck with you. I would have used a stronger word there, but we don't want the FCC to come in and take away our transmitter license. But, yeah, the Democratic Party leadership just gave their own voters the finger, and I don't think the Democratic voters are going to sit for that.
What's going to happen if they keep backing Hillary Clinton, who keeps losing, and then her FBI and criminal investigation doesn't really go her way? I mean, it's going to hit the fan big time.
Well, we still have the situation in Iowa where they're trying to investigate the vote fraud that was taking place there. The state Democratic Party is saying, no, none of your business, go away. We told you what you're supposed to believe, and it still won't release the final raw count. I mean, we had that story about this one guy was the only caucuser in a precinct. He voted for Sanders, and yet somehow, it got put into Hillary's column.
Well, I think Donald Trump, and I was listening to him yesterday, he understands what happened to him in Iowa, let's face it, but he really had a lot of volunteers out at all polling places in New Hampshire just to make sure there was no monkey business again. And I think he's getting wiser really quickly about what's happening.
Well, he'd better. But one of the things you need to understand about why Hillary's campaign is behaving the way it is, if you study campaign strategists and that Sandra Bullock movie, Our Brand is Crisis, which is based on a documentary of a real election in Bolivia where they hired American election experts. Their mindset is thinking the next poll, the next vote. And they're not thinking long term. And that's why they'll make decisions like, we're going to use the party machinery to screw Bernie Sanders out of his delegates. We're going to use the super delegates to screw the Democratic voters. And they're not thinking how this is going to play out in the minds of the Democratic voters over the next several months, because they're not used to thinking in those timescales.
Well, do you remember when Jimmy Carter used to go to these banana republic countries to observe, to make sure their elections are fair? I think Jimmy Carter should stay in the United States and go to work here. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, like I keep saying, our elections are so crooked they have to screw those ballots into the ballot boxes.
Yeah. Hey, I just wanted your thoughts on that. You have such a good day, Mike. It's great to talk to you.
All right.
I just wanted to mention one thing before you left.
Real fast.
Canada just sold about 50% of its gold reserves over the last few days, so I don't know if we're going to hit that in the next hour or whatever, but they sold it on the international market. We now have 1.3 tons of gold left, and that is it.
Oh, boy, that's not good at all. All right, listen, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We got a bunch of phone calls to get through, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. The phone lines are loaded up here. Before I take calls, though, a little update on the situation of Ted Cruz and his qualifications to be President of the United States of America. In fact, he may not have even really been eligible to be in the Senate. Breitbart News has scored big time. They have discovered that the parents of Senator Ted Cruz were on a Calgary list of electors for Canada's federal election in 1974. Ted was 4-ish about that time. Now, Canadian law restricts federal voting rights to Canadian citizens, and Canada does not recognize dual citizenship. So in 1974, both of Ted Cruz's parents had given up their U.S. and Cuban citizenships and were citizens of Canada, which also made them British subjects because the Queen's mandate didn't expire until the 1980s. And what is very angering about this, what's very revealing about this, is that the entire GOP establishment, and let's be fair, the Democrats with that nonsense with the superdelegates, seem to feel the laws are only for us little people, and that they, the elite, should be allowed to do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it, including running a candidate for the presidency who does not meet the constitutional qualifications. The fact that both of his parents are foreign citizens means he can't get the security clearances needed to see documents the president is supposed to look at. And then, of course, there is that issue of natural born, which was legally defined in the writings of the day when the Constitution was written, born inside the country. Cruz cannot be president under the Constitution, but they don't care. And haven't we had enough of politicians who think the Constitution is just a blankety-blank piece of paper that should not encumber them anymore in their march to empire? All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Max in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. You and I share the same birthday, by the way. I wanted to ask you, since the Bank of International Settlements owns both Euro and the U.S. petrodollar, why is it important that the Middle East trade its oil on the U.S. petrodollar versus the euro?
Because the United States financial system makes the interest payments and favorable trade arrangements. I mean, ever since Bretton Woods at the end of World War II, the U.S. sends out stacks of ink and paper, and they get back manufactured goods and agricultural produce. While the Bank of International Settlements may be at the top of it all, this is a fight between Europe and the U.S., as to who is going to make money over being the global trade and banking currency. Now, Europe isn't all that hot and bothered to be there because they're a manufacturing powerhouse. They've got good agriculture when it's not being blocked for sale by sanctions against Russia and so forth. But here in the United States of America, our financial system got lazy, getting this flow of wealth coming in from everybody having to use the dollar, and as a result, they've allowed our manufacturing to decline both in quality and quantity over the last 30 years, and nobody wants America's agricultural produce because of the GMO problem. And so as a result, if the world drops using the dollar across borders, the U.S. economy is finished. There's nothing left to hold it up anymore. And that's why the U.S. government is going around the world wagging weapons at everybody saying, you will use our dollar, you will buy our GMO, and you will like it.
So, are there big differences between the owners of the Federal Reserve and the other banks that are centralized? I mean, I thought they were the same people.
It's the same families. Not necessarily the same individuals, but it's the same families. And these families have grown very, very wealthy. They've been playing this scam on planet Earth for 300 years now. Okay?
Okay. Yes, sir. Thank you very much for your help.
All right. We're going to switch over here to Terry in Oregon. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, Donald Trump sounded real good last night in his acceptance speech, victory speech, rather. And he's going to do all these great things for the country, and I like every one of them. The only thing that scares me about him is he's a little bit too close to Israel for my comfort.
Well, first of all, name me a politician who isn't sucking up to Israel. But in the case of Donald Trump, let me finish. In the case of Donald Trump, he's actually been very honest about that. He said he's got business dealings with Israeli companies, and he's flat out said, I have to tread lightly, so that these businesses will go on being businesses. And he's very honest about it. He's got financial interests in Israel, and he's got to be a little bit gentle and careful about that. Just like anybody working in Hollywood knows, you don't criticize Israel, or your career is over. And he's certainly being a lot more honest about his relationship with Israel than you get from people like Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton or any of these other politicians who are out there trying to say, we owe a debt to Israel. Israel is great. We have to support the only democracy. And, Trump is being far more truthful about his relationship with Israel than any of the other candidates, okay?
Yeah, and but Israel's really close to the central bankers.
They're very close. By the way, if you look at the Israeli media, they do not want Donald Trump in the White House because they're not convinced he will do everything Israel tells him to do, like his predecessors have been doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, Mike, I'm going to let you go. We got callers waiting, and we got commercial talk after that.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to switch to Will in Ohio. Aloha, Will. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike? I just wanted to make a quick comment and then ask you a question. I'll take my answer off air.
Okay.
Went to my local bullion dealer today, hoping to drop, a nice little chunk of change. And lo and behold, once again, won't sell me any more than 2 or 3 ounces. So what's that tell people? That's not a good sign. So, get your physical, get it while you can, because anyway, here's my question. How do I deal with these Bernie Sanders people I run into, who try to tell me, oh, you see your streets getting plowed, that's socialism, it's already socialism. Like, why is socialism not a huge red flag to these people anymore? And what do I say to people who are talking about Sanders like this is what we need? How would you respond to that? And I'll take my answer off air. And Dustin in New Jersey, I love it when you call in, and I can listen to you and him talk forever. I'll talk to you soon, brother. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Well, first of all, I want to talk about your experience at the coin dealer. First of all, especially if you're buying gold, you want to buy often in small amounts so that there isn't a paper record for the coming gold confiscation, which they're going to have to do. When they ban cash, they're going to have to ban owning any commodity that can hold value, because otherwise people will empty their savings accounts and stock portfolios, and they'll stock up on silver and gold and platinum and the rest of it. What's going on is that there's a tremendous shortage of physical metals. And so coin dealers, in order to be fair to all their customers, they're going to say so many per customer, and that's just, trying to take care of everybody and keeping everybody happy. That's what's going on there. Now, with regard to, I actually forgot the second part of the question here. I really apologize. It went on my aging brain here. All right, so I apologize for forgetting the question. If you want to call back in and ask it again. But it actually just faded away from there. All right, getting on back to the news here. Story coming out of National Review, Clinton's crushing New Hampshire defeat. Now, the corporate media is going to be telling everybody that Clinton lost New Hampshire, but they're not going to be reporting on the chicanery with the superdelegates by which she actually came out of New Hampshire with 2 more delegates than Bernie Sanders. Don't want to annoy the Democrats and let them know how they're being cheated. And they're all out there saying, what happened? What went wrong? Where did we go wrong? Well, you ran a candidate with a long history of scandals, cattle futures trades, Travelgate, Hillary Care, Whitewater, Castle Grand, Flowerwood, the death of Vince Foster, and the possibility that she's running a spy operation, or was running a spy operation on that email server of her. And yeah, that's what you did wrong. You picked a bad candidate right from the start. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Got way too many buttons to pay attention to around here. Got a caller waiting on the line. I'm going to get to you in a minute, but I want to finish up with the candidates and the political stuff here. Hillary, coming out of New Hampshire, has already reshaped her campaign message. The new slogan is, it's not me, it's you. When you vote for Hillary, you're voting for yourself. And she's still trying to play to the female vote. Remember how they had Gloria Steinem and Madeleine Albright out there saying, if any women who don't vote for Hillary, they're going to the dark places. And again, Hillary lost that demographic. But that's the new message they're moving forward with. And don't forget, we have that gentleman up in Iowa, Keen Schwartz, who's gone public, saying he was the only caucuser in this one precinct, and he voted for Bernie Sanders, and yet somehow that wound up in Hillary's column. So we know Hillary is trying to steal this, and she's being aided and abetted by the Democratic National Committee with malice aforethought. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Scott in, let's see, where's that one? Wisconsin. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Aloha, brother. Michael, if anybody wants to learn a lesson of what's going on right now. Look at what they did to Ron Paul a few years ago.
Oh, they did it to him
He was
twice.
ahead of things, and they knocked him right out. So go back and study that, people. Michael, I wanted you to listen to a couple of things, and I'll let you address them. Mike, did you hear and catch that I just saw yesterday that the Chinese bought the Chicago Stock Exchange?
Yes.
Did you catch any of that?
Yes, I did.
I mean, how about, let's look at the chess game. Michael, I remember talking to you, I love you, brother, years ago about Syria, when that started to go up and they were trying to say Assad had that chemical thing on his people. And now look at as we go through these years of what they go and say that is the CIA boys of our headhunters of the United States is lost. How about talking about the Kmarts that just closed in this country in April? We got so much stuff going on back behind us, Michael, with Walmart's closing, Kmart's closing. Yet I agree to talk about the candidates, but we gotta talk about the economics like you do of this economics collapsing and get prepared for it, because you ain't gonna be able to go to the hospital when the stuff hits the fan. You better know natural medicine if you're gonna stay alive. How about when you're running low on food? You got to know about to go about that. So I agree of talking about these candidates, but we got to understand, we got to get prepared, because we know that an economic crash is going to happen. And Michael, I'll let you comment. Keep up the good work, brother. Aloha.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. Basically, what's going on here, there is a crash coming, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show, probably at the top of hour number 2. And politicians, generally, if they see a problem, the first thing they think of is, can I do something with this that makes me look good? And if they do, then the problem is given, headline news coverage, even if they have to make it up, like human-caused global warming. Because that's how politicians think. If there's a problem and they can't do anything about it, it gets ignored. Fukushima, WIP, Hanford, apparently on Monday they had another accident at a U.S. nuclear plant, got no news whatsoever. They're not talking about things that they can't fix, because it underscores the fact they can't fix them. And that's why they're not talking about all the red warning signs in the economy. It's an election year. They have to find things that make them look good. We're going to talk about, gay marriage and abortion and all these other things that Americans are really concerned about, and ignore some really ominous signs there. I mean, it's kind of like the captain of the Titanic, as the seawater is up to his knees, and he's complaining about how the flags are not hung correctly on the top of the mast. All righty, getting on back to Hillary Clinton, a federal judge is now chastising the Justice Department because apparently the court had agreed to extend the deadline for the release of the final Hillary Clinton email, 7,000, on February 18th, splitting the difference between when they were originally due and when the Justice Department wants to hand them over, which is after the first 4 caucuses and primaries. And the judge is now saying the Justice Department has to explain today why they can't turn it over. And I'm sure the Justice Department is out there saying, it was the snow. It was really bad snow. Horrible. You have no idea how bad the snow was. Maybe it was too dark. The dog ate the emails. Okay, we stored them on Lois Lerner's hard drive. And basically what the Justice Department is trying to do is they were hoping Hillary was going to win New Hampshire and South Carolina and get momentum going so she can become the president and ultimately pardon herself. And that's what's going on here. It's a cover-up. And the mere existence of this stalling tactic by the Department of Justice tells you there's a cover-up. And I think I'm pretty sure what they're really covering up, and it goes way beyond the server itself and the violations of Title 18. The fact that nobody will even address the question of whether Hillary was selling secrets in exchange for donations to her charitable foundation is very telling. The silence, as they say, is deafening. And there's legitimate reason to ask that question because of what happened back in 1996 with the Chinagate scandal. They're stalling, flat out stalling. Now, there was an interesting article, actually it was a video over on YouTube, and it's talking about how the corporate media is still trying to present the illusion that Americans are either Republicans or Democrats. But the reality is a lot of Americans don't align with those parties anymore. They'll align with some third party, or they don't have a party affiliation at all. Remember, up in New Hampshire, 40% of those voters were not declared for either party. And it's a reminder that these two parties are losing their grip on the American public, partly because we keep seeing them display this attitude of what the party members actually want, the rank and file voters, and we're going to decide for you. They did it in 2012. They did it to Ron Paul twice. They're doing it again with Hillary Clinton. And they're trying to do it to Donald Trump. They don't want you to have a candidate of your own choosing. They want to force candidates on you who are already pre-approved by the Wall Street money junkies, the military-industrial complex, and Israel. And that's it. And because of that, Americans are disaffected. And the actual membership in these parties is shrinking rapidly. And maybe it's time for the two-party system to be ended and go back to the system the nation started with, which was anybody, any group could start a political party. And they were all on an equal legal footing. Today, the laws are rigged to make the Republican and Democratic parties to give them an advantage, to block out third-party challengers. Another article coming out of the conservative treehouse saying the New Hampshire outcome, the establishment Republican Party needs to be destroyed. And they are talking about this blatant display of disregard for their own party voters in terms of what they want. And ditto the Democrats, let's be fair. They're both playing that same game. All right, we're going to try and grab one more phone call before the top of the hour news. Cliff in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing today?
Doing good.
Well, I just wanted to talk about Obama and George Soros with their gun-grabbing scheme where they're walking away with millions while, what is that, crony capitalism?
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Could you slow down and speak a little louder?
Is that crony capitalism in action, or is that fascism?
It's corruption.
Obama and George Soros.
It's corruption. However you want to put it, whatever label you want to put onto it, this is flat-out corruption, and we used to have laws limiting how much people could give to political candidates and causes so that the size of their campaign fund was a true measure of their popular support. Today, it is, wide open. The government is for sale to the highest bidder. Okay, we got to take a break for our top-of-the-hour news and commercials. Thank you for the call, Cliff. We'll be back with a call from James in Ohio after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2 here. We got a caller waiting on the line. He's been very patient. I'm going to ask you to wait another couple of minutes. As you heard on the news break, Carly Fiorina has now dropped out of the GOP race for the White House. So that's 2 down today, coming out of New Hampshire. And somebody was kind enough to write in and remind me the question that I blanked out on in the last hour, where the caller said, how do you deal with Bernie Sanders people talking about socialism and we're already socialist and so forth? I think you need to have a clearer understanding of the difference between socialism and fascism, because ultimately all political ideologies come down onto one of those two. Now, socialism is a system that says everybody has an equal right to life's blessings, and fascism is a system which says the elites have a right to everything, and the world's population only exists to serve them. Those are the two models. And what we have in the United States now is fascism. We have not been a capitalist nation for years, decades. We have gone hardcore fascism, as proven by TARP, quantitative easing, constant bailouts, the people being looted to prop up the financial centers. Because under fascism, if you make money, you get to keep it. And if you lose money, the losses are transferred onto the people. So what you need to do is, first of all, educate people the difference between fascism and socialism. Now, I'd like to go back to a true fair market capitalist society, but if I have to choose between fascism and socialism, especially looking at what fascism is doing to our nation now, I'm going to come down on the socialist side. And I don't have a problem at all with Bernie Sanders' point of view, which is why he is so hated by Wall Street, that love fascism and serfdom and privatization of the public assets and so forth. So that was the missing answer. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. James in Ohio, thank you for waiting so long. What's on your mind today?
No problem. There is a YouTube channel called China Uncensored, and they offer news about China that's in a way that you get a laugh and then you cry a little bit. But recently they had a video, why are U.S. companies leaving China? And according to the American Chamber of Commerce in China, in their 2016 China Business Climate Survey report, 1/4 of all U.S. companies are leaving China. I kind of find this remarkable in that it must be so very cheap right now to transfer goods back and forth, from the U.S. to China, vice versa. So I wonder what that portends. Also,
well, before you move on here, we need to be very careful about the United States Chamber of Commerce because they have been exposed in the past as having links to the intelligence services, and
right. Well,
we don't know we don't know who created this YouTube channel about China. But just as we're seeing all of this propaganda to demonize Russia, we can expect an equal amount of propaganda to demonize China.
Well, yeah, they're definitely, generally, they have a pro-U.S., anti-Chinese government message.
Bingo.
But, also, something I'm surprised the alt media never brought up during Jeb Bush's campaign is that you might remember a man named Henry Lee Lucas.
Yes.
He's one of the most prolific serial killers of all kind. He was a cannibal, a necrophile, etc., etc. And he had a partner named Otis Toole. Well, when he was caught in Texas, the hanging governor, he commuted Lucas's sentence. And Jeb, when Otis Toole was caught in Florida, Jeb commuted his sentence to a life sentence. Now, that's kind of remarkable. These people that have confronted Bush on the campaign trail, they should have asked him about that because there's really no answer to it. But
well, at this point, it doesn't look like Jeb Bush is going to be a factor unless the GOP can succeed in getting to a brokered convention, at which point, yeah, they're probably going to hand it to Bush, because we all know in the fascist United States of America that the White House is an hereditary office that's passed off between the two dynastic ruling families, the Bushes and the Clintons.
Yeah, that's all I got for you. Thank you for your
time. All right,
time.
Thank you very much, and we're going to let you go here. Now, getting on to the war zones, and there is a lot going on, and it is being ignored in the American corporate media. They're totally focused on the election, and I understand that's a top story, but there's some stuff going on we need to be paying attention to. Over in Syria, we're seeing more and more indications that time has run out for the United States to find some kind of a way to get back inside Syria, either directly or through proxy invasions by Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And you can almost sense the desperation with all of this going on here. We've got Turkey saying that, we have an obligation to protect Aleppo, going back to World War I. And what's really kind of weird is Turkey is basically saying they want to protect Aleppo, Syria from the Syrian people, which makes no sense at all. But we're seeing more and more articles like this one out of Global Research. Putin's Aleppo gamble pays off. And it's basically saying, after all the years of the U.S. pretending to go after the terrorists and actually waging war on Syria, Russia has come on in and just completely changed the game, and it's all but over at this point. They're skedaddling for the border, for the Turkish border. Another article along the same line here over in Fort Russ. The Western hysterical hula dance means Russia is on the right road, and they're basically talking about the hysterical frothing at the mouth to bash Russia and say, if it's all their fault, they spoiled our party, we were doing a great job in Syria. Depending upon your point of view, that could be true. But based on the claims made to we, the American people, the United States was doing a terrible job. Now, Russia has offered the U.S. a concrete plan to end the Syrian crisis. This is coming from Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. And they're not going into details, but I imagine that what Lavrov told the United States is you take your phony baloney terrorist groups and you leave, and the war will be over. Because at that point, that's the only thing keeping the war going are the U.S.-backed terror groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra. Another article coming out of Rents.com, the relentless Russia bashing continues. Russia bad, Russia bad. We're good, they're bad. They're really desperate to start a new Cold War and get us back to a world where we're all conditioned. If we hear the word Russian, we'll wet ourselves and throw our money and our babies onto the bayonets. And they're not getting a lot of traction because it's a very, very different world. And the people of the world are not the naive, ignorant, trusting people that they once were. We're skeptical. We're aware. We're thinking for ourselves, and that's the doom for any tyrant and dictatorship. Let's see. We're talking about, yes, Turkey's prime minister. Turkey will defend its Aleppo brothers. Here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. All right, let's start grabbing phone calls because the lines are filling up here. Jim in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike? I heard a story about Turkey possibly shooting down 2 U.S. helicopters inside Syria and then the U.S. covering it up. Do you hear about that story?
I remember looking at that, and I think it tracked back to a source that is unreliable, and that's why we didn't really go with that one. It could have happened, but we couldn't get any confirmation on it.
Okay, and as far as Russia, how many times has Russia been our ally? How many times has Russia been on our side? I know they were in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War.
And they were certainly on our side during World War II. And
right.
But, you know, the history is everybody changes allegiance. We've always been at war with East Asia. Oceania has always been our friend. I mean, that's where Orwell got all of that nonsense, okay?
You won't hear the corporate media say it, though.
No, the corporate media is going to act just like Orwell's media. No, Russia's bad. You don't even think about how they helped us during the Civil War. No, Russia is bad. You know, they're stopping short of calling them commies because they're not anymore. But anyway, listen, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go right to the phone lines here. Frank in London, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I just wanted to ask you if you heard about the program the BBC put on regarding Russia.
Yes.
And it was almost a sort of a apocalyptic view of Russia. I think the only thing left for them to do was stick to Red Horns and Putin's head, and he'll be the devil.
Oh, I'm sure they're going to come up with that, very, very soon. I mean, there is unfortunately way too many of world leaders who think a world war is the best solution out of their self-made problems, and they'll make money and they'll retain their power, and they don't care how many millions of other people's children are going to get killed in this thing. I mean, we're hearing from Saudi Arabia, they're still talking about they're going to do a ground invasion in Syria, and you have to wonder how all these Saudi military feel about their government basically renting them out as hired mercenaries for the U.S. agenda.
Exactly. I think the Iranian foreign minister, was talking about it, and it looks as he was trying to force himself to keep a straight face. He's trying to stop himself from laughing about Saudi Arabia sending troops into Syria when they having enough trouble with the Yemenis.
Well, they're starting to bring some of the Blackwater mercenaries into Yemen, fighting alongside the Saudis because they're not doing very well. And the difference in military between Yemen, where they're basically fighting an unorganized population, and Syria, which has a battle-hardened military from the last 4 years, they're not going to do very well.
Yep. And you had a saying that to expose a dictator, get them to behave like one. I think in Erdogan's case, to expose a mad dog, let him out the kennel and allow him to run freely. And we see what Erdogan is really all about now.
It's already happening. We're seeing articles in the international media about how Turkey is descending into a very obvious dictatorship. And, Erdogan is now out there. He's threatening Europe to give him more money or he's going to sick more refugees on them. He's telling the United States that if they want to go on doing business with Turkey, that they have to drop their support for the Kurds. And so he's getting kind of big for his britches, I think. He needs a good humbling is what he needs.
Yeah. Maybe you should allow him to take on the Russians, really. They should allow him to go one-to-one.
Well, unfortunately, that would be the excuse for the U.S. to come on in and say, we have to take care of our friend. And again, the U.S. government, certain portions of the U.S. government think an outright war, or at least a new Cold War with Russia, is going to solve all their problems. And it isn't, because the world has changed around them and they don't recognize that.
Yeah, unfortunately. Thanks, Mike. And we have to tell Erdogan stop taking advice from John McCain.
Yeah, everybody ought to stop taking advice from John McCain. Thanks an awful lot for the call, Frank. We're going to switch over to Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thinking about Donald Trump and Chris Christie and Trump's connections to New Jersey and the Atlantic City Boardwalk and the fact that he's used to taking advice from lawyers and accountants and consultants and stuff, and maybe he could use someone with the courtroom savvy of a ex-federal prosecutor who's a governor, but might be a little too right-wing for him, but maybe could make it work.
Well, Trump has actually been making noises about picking Ted Cruz to be his vice presidential running mate, but whether or not Chris Christie might have a cabinet position, I mean, that's certainly possible.
Oh, yeah, I could see him making Christie attorney general,
Yeah.
But well, the thing about Cruz, I don't know, Cruz might bring him a good chunk of the evangelical vote, but I think Christie would net him a certain number of, like, paleo-conservative, strong right-wing conservative Republican types,
Well, unfortunately for all of Trump's talk, he can't pick Cruz as his vice president because when they started running president and vice president as a unit, they added an amendment to the Constitution saying the vice president has to meet the same requirements as the presidency, natural-born citizen, just in case the president passes away and the vice president has to step into the office. So Cruz cannot be president, cannot be vice president, probably should not have been allowed to be a senator. But, Trump is out there looking at Cruz's support. But coming out of New Hampshire, Trump may be rethinking that.
Well, and I think Christie, I'm from Pennsylvania. Christie's from, right over in New Jersey, here, not too far away in Trenton and stuff. And he seems, when I think of Chris Christie, he seems to me like an adult. He might be a bit, brusque or brutish or, or blunt or something like that. But he definitely seems like an adult. Cruz strikes me as like he's got this wacky, goofy, kind of cultish aspect to him that doesn't seem like a normal guy to me.
Well, and he knows he's living a lie. He has to know he's living a lie about his citizenship.
Yeah, certainly to mid-Atlantic people, Christie seems like, if not a regular guy, at least somewhat normal guy. So, all righty. And let's hear. I hope Trump. I hope he guards his tongue a little more carefully. I think he's getting a little too sloppy with this, reference to the P word for kitty cat and talk about waterboarding and stuff. I think he needs to, as he gains popularity, not get overconfident and get a little too loose.
Yeah, he could there, but going back on this other thing about the P word, and I'm getting kind of sick of anything word being used as a euphemism. When did we become such thin-skinned people that we are just going to break into a cold sweat at certain words? If you go to a newborn baby and you use a bad word on them, they'll smile at you because they have not yet been taught that they're supposed to be shocked at certain words. It's not instinctive or natural. It's learned, imposed behavior. It's part of the system of psychological control. And Trump is out there saying... he doesn't have time to waste being politically correct, and a lot of people who are sick of political correctness are buying into that.
Well, look, there are at least 3 different 4-letter words for fecal matter some of which are viewed as, okay, and one of them is the big no-no. I mean, you can say poop, and that has the juvenile sound. You can say crap, that has a frustrated.
All right, we have to be very careful here because we've got the FCC looking for a reason to kind of shut us down here.
Say the S word. I know. I remember George Carlin. Yes. I know them. 7.
How far we have fallen since the Supreme Court's Carlin decision. I mean, how far... Okay.
McAfee dropped the BS bomb on another show today. He's got to watch himself, too.
All right. Well, listen, Glenn, we're coming up on a commercial break. I'm going to let you go here. And the fact of the matter is, again, it's part of Trump's image as a plain talker. And people are resonating with that because they're tired of this constantly, I must control what I say because somebody somewhere in the solar system might be offended by it. But again, be offended. Nothing happens when you're offended. It's your problem, not mine. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call from, I think it's Micaeus up in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I'm enjoying listening to your show.
Thank you.
I spread the word about you quite a bit. The way I introduce you to people is I say that you would not want to be this guy's enemy. The way he'll just calmly just drill into you, just without breaking a sweat, just rip you apart and devastate you. So it's a good thing that we're on the same side.
Well, thank you very much, but I'll let you know I do break into a sweat sometimes. So I'm not as cool and calm and collected as I come across on TV.
Well, you're putting on a good show for the TV. It looks like you never break a sweat.
Okay.
Totally agree with you. This delegate scam, just shameful. Caller mentioned about Chris Christie. What a joke that anyone is even thinking that Chris Christie could ever be anything. Like this bully that sabotages his own city traffic or sabotages another city, has ambulances not making it to the hospital. Like, what a joke.
Yeah. Again, there's an issue here that as our national infrastructure breaks down, it gets harder and harder to do things. As the economy shuts down and more funds are diverted to war and Wall Street and Israel, local communities can't buy all the emergency equipment they'd like to have. They can't repair all the streets, and sooner or later you get this epiphenomenon where there are so many broken aspects that the system as a whole begins to slow down and stop working. Now, I'm not a Chris Christie supporter or fan, but looking at the issue of how many things are breaking down across the country, it's not political so much as it's economic.
Right. And speaking of Israel, you just mentioned the Canadian politician that you brought up a couple of days ago, Dr. James Sears, on a televised Canadian debate. I won't say the word, but he said that Canada is Israel's.
Yeah.
B and rhymes with Hillary Clinton's true profession.
Yes. At this point, what nation isn't? In fact, there was an article we posted to WhatReallyHappened.com today, basically pointing out about how powerful the Israel lobby is in all countries. That's how Israel sees themselves, as ruling the world, because they're God's chosen, and they're utterly ruthless in getting what they want, because they absolutely truly believe they have this unshakable sense of entitlement that they are supposed to get what they want and nobody else counts. And unfortunately, it's a very infectious attitude that is beginning to has contaminated our political and financial structure.
Right. I read some of the Talmud, and I'm afraid that I can't even talk about it, being a Canadian because of our laws.
Yes.
That I could go to jail for even talking about it. I was wondering, why have I never heard you citing any passages from that?
Well, the reason is, and I've also read it. You need to remember, my first wife was Ashkenazi, and I had nothing to do with why we ultimately divorced. I want to focus on the actions of Israel's government, and I prefer not to go after the religion itself. And I keep a big black line in place there, because I want to stay focused on the actions of Israel's political leadership, because that's just a small group of people. And Israel loves to go on out and say that any criticism of the actions of Israel's government is anti-Semitism and Jew hate and the rest of it. And so generally I like to keep my focus, because the problem isn't their religion, ultimately. It isn't their ethnicity. It's their behavior. And so we stay focused on the behavior and the actions of this group of people.
That makes a lot of sense, because then you would be handing over ammunition for them to say, oh, you're generalizing about the people, you're generalizing about the religion. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion,
should independently.
Yeah, the Jewish people of all the world are not really responsible for the actions of the government of Israel, because Israel doesn't listen to them any more than our government listens to us. By that same extension, the American people as a whole are not responsible for the actions of Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. isn't listening to us. And all the world's Muslims are not responsible for the actions of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, whoever they ultimately turn out they really are.
Exactly.
Okay?
Excellent. Thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. Now then, Moscow is a little upset that they were not given any notice on the NATO plans to deploy troops in Eastern Europe. Now, normally when you are in peacetime and you are moving military troops around for training or exercises as a courtesy and to avoid misunderstanding, you will tell all the nations in the area, hey, we're moving up a bunch of tanks and troops. It's for training and preparation. Don't worry about it. And Moscow was not informed at all. Maybe somebody was hoping they'd spot all these troops and military vehicles coming in and panic and launch some kind of an attack. Because there's one piece missing in this building war with Russia. And that is, nobody is going to think this is Russia's idea or Russia's fault. The propaganda is out there trying to convince you that Russia's the bad guy here. But so far, Putin has played it very cool, very low-key. And the world pretty much understands the aggressor in the current rush to a new world war is the United States of America and its allies. And it's all being driven by economic necessity, debt slavery to those private central bankers. And remember, the private central banks, they love war. War is their richest harvest of debt. Do you know that before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war, and now we're into number 3? All right, we're going to grab another phone call. Mark in North Carolina, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, 2 things. One, I got a question for you. How bad do you think Bernie Sanders really is? Because, you know, they're making him out to be like Leon Trotsky or Nikolai Lenin. And I'm wondering, do you think he's just like a European socialist type guy or what? I think really...
Well, you know, they're making him out to be like, they're by going back to Trotsky, they're trying to play to the American people's fears of communism and the Soviet Union. There's only one small problem with that. The Soviet Union went away a long time ago, and the younger generation of Americans did not go through the brainwashing in school to learn that they had to hate the Soviet Union and not ask questions why. And so that's why Bernie Sanders has a lot of support among young people. Some of the older people, those implanted fears are still active. But I think it's going to come down to the American people realizing that we are not a capitalist nation, that we've gone fascist, and they're going to look at the difference between fascism and socialism and realize that for ordinary Americans, socialism is going to be a better deal. And I think that's one of the reasons Bernie Sanders is doing as well as he's doing, along with the fact that for most Democratic voters, you know, it's anybody but Hillary at this point. And we already know Hillary is using election fraud to do as well as she's doing, and then she's using the superdelegates to basically steal New Hampshire from Bernie Sanders.
Well, I would take Sanders not only for her, I would take her over Jeb Bush. I'd probably take her over Marco Rubio and a lot of these other Republicans, other than Trump and maybe Cruz. I'd probably take them over any of them. But the other thing I want to...
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem if Sanders won the White House. I wouldn't have a problem with that at all.
Okay. All right, that's good to know, because I respect your opinion.
Okay.
And it brings me back to Russia, about, you know, talking about Russia again.
Yeah.
I was driving earlier today, and there was one of the news stations I have on the radio, and this guy was in, I think it was Fox News, but I'm not sure, interviewing I don't know who it was. It sounded like he was some kind of a neocon think tank.
We're running out of time here, and it sounds like you need a little more time to get to your point. So, Mark, I'm going to put you on hold and have your comment and question ready when we come back from these words from our sponsors. So we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call from Mark in North Carolina. You had something more you wanted to add.
Yeah, Mike. I remember now who it was. I was driving home before, and it was, I think, Shepard Smith, the guy from Fox News, and he was interviewing somebody. I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was some kind of a think tank or ex-general or what, but this guy was going on about how Russia is savagely bombing civilians and killing our friends there in Syria rather than going after ISIS, and we need to do something. Now, you know, the thing is, I was starting to curse at the radio because I know enough to know that's an out-and-out lie. I get it from RT, I get it from you, I get it from Alex Jones, I get it from other internet sites, Veterans Today. I get it from all these people, and I know it's an out-and-out lie that, in fact, Russia is the liberator. Well, Russia and the Syrian Arab Army, that's the actual army of Assad, are the heroes.
Yes.
They're destroying the terrorists who we're arming. We're actually arming. And yet, with a straight face, these mainstream media bums and these think tanks and ex-generals and whatever else you got on there are trying to make it look like Russia's the bad guy, and they're just getting ready. I remember, like you, I grew up during the Cold War. I served in the military during the Cold War. We don't need that again. I don't know how bad the Soviet Union was or was, at this point. I used to think it was the ultimate evil, but now I'm starting to wonder about it, But I know that Russia today is not the Soviet Union. It's not a communist nation. It's not a threat to the United States.
Well, hold it. It is in the economic sense. If you look at the rise of the ruble and over in China the yuan, displacing the dollar as the global trade and banking currency. And that's what's really driving all of this, is the U.S. is trying to bring the world back under the hegemony of the U.S. dollar. And it's an obsolete concept anyway. I mean, back during the time of Bretton Woods, when accounts were still being settled with exchanging bullion or boxes of paper notes, having a single recognized global currency did make sense. But in this day and age of instantaneous global electronic financial transactions, there doesn't need to be a single global trade and banking currency. But because of decisions made, policy, by the financial centers in Washington, D.C., the U.S. is now stuck. If they don't have everybody using U.S. dollars and paying interest on them, or sending us manufactured goods and agricultural produce for those pieces of ink and paper, the U.S. economy is going to collapse. There's nothing else left to hold it up. And that's what's driving the war agenda. Russia is a threat, not to you, not to me, not to the people listening to this show. Russia is a threat to Wall Street. And that is considered... Sorry?
How come Donald Trump is smart enough to realize that's not the case? I mean, he does talk like a war hawk sometimes. I mean, I'm going to bomb you.
The problem I have with Donald Trump is he displays a very alarming degree of political naivete. Too much of his worldview is based on what he saw on the TV news. And if he comes into the White House, he's going to be as naive and out of touch as Jimmy Carter was. And Jimmy Carter got blindsided with that whole helicopter crash in Iran and so forth. Trump needs to get himself some really knowledgeable political advisors to tell him what's really been going on in the world, and he's got to pay attention. And I'm sure that he'll say, yeah, this makes sense. Okay?
Yeah, well, he does seem to understand about Russia. He does seem to understand that it's nonsense what they're saying about Russia, and that's a good thing. That we don't need to start.
Oh, yeah, he's saying that, he was out there saying, we can be friends with Russia. There's no reason for us not to be friends with Russia.
I think the guy Roger Stone is good advice. I think you should keep listening to this guy. And he's coming out with his book. I already ordered a book about the Bush crime family. Coming out, I think, next week sometime. I think you should listen to a guy like that because I think he's cluing him in on some reality. You know what I mean?
Okay, I'm having trouble hearing the phone connection here. What's the name of the book and who's the author?
Roger Stone.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, I know about Roger. I know Roger.
you should get him as a guest. It's called I believe it's called the Bush Crime Family. I already ordered it from Barnes and Noble. Supposed to come out, I think, next week, early next week.
All right, I'll try and get him on the show, okay?
He's really onto these neocons, really seems to understand them well, and he's one of Trump's chief advisors. The other guy who's good is this guy who's advising him now, who used to work for that senator from Alabama Sessions. His name is Steve Miller, not the Steve Miller Band, Steve Miller. And he seems to be very good. He's advising him about, evil of the TPP and also on how to deal with the illegal alien problem.
All right, well, that's a very, very positive sign. And again, Trump is going to be a politician. He's going to say to the audience, he's not going to cross lines that will alienate the audience. And right. But I'm glad he's got that kind of advisor because he really does need it, or he's going to be another Jimmy Carter. And I'm not saying Jimmy Carter was bad, but Jimmy Carter was just way out of his depth with that cesspool in Washington, D.C. All right, Mark, got to let you... All right, Mark, got to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now, do you remember a while back when Turkey shot down this Russian aircraft deep inside Syria on the claim that the Russian plane had violated Turkish airspace, and it was never really proven if the Russian plane did, and if it did, it was only for a few seconds, transiting an area clearly not in a threatening pose. And Turkey was out there saying, we have a right to defend ourselves. Well, it turns out that yesterday, Turkish aircraft once again violated Greek airspace, and this was a serious incursion. 6 fighter jets, at least 2 of them carrying weapons on the wing pylons, and they just decided to fly through Greek airspace to prove that Turkey can do whatever it wants to do. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves one more phone call before the top of the hour. Ramon in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing? I called you last week about, or actually, I think it was a few days ago about the colloidal silver.
Yes.
And the thing is, there's another website that I read a lot about copper in your diet, copper-based diet. It's called unveilingthem.org, and you scroll down and it says DNA blood. And the thing is copper, if you take a copper-based supplement, because you're not zero in on copper in your diet, then take a copper-based supplement, and I believe that kills a lot of the stuff that is in the vaccines as well.
Well, I'm not familiar with copper or nanocopper or anything, but I will take a look at it. I mean, ultimately, because we evolved on this world, we evolved to use what's here. And that includes the silver and obviously the carbon and the nitrogen and everything. Ancient Romans actually believed that wearing copper jewelry would cure arthritis. So, again, a lot of this folklore may seem like myth, and back in these ancient times, they didn't have the means to understand why certain things work, like silver. They simply recognized the pattern that it did work, and they would call it magic, but it turns out in many cases, like with silver, there was a scientific foundation for their observation. Anyway, listen, Ramon, I got to let you...
Wait till you read it, though, Mike.
Okay.
It only takes about an hour, but, you'll love it.
All right, I got to let you go. We're coming up on the top of the hour news, and I got a bunch of stories I got to get to. Let's get into the economy. I'm going to skip forward down the talking points here. And the carnage continues, as they say. The Japanese stocks crashed again last night. Australia's stock market is clearly into a bear market, and, of course, our markets today... were all over the place, but ended in the red on the Dow. Now, a lot of attention is being focused on Deutsche Bank because a lot of their bonds are starting to be in trouble. Schauble is out there trying to soothe nerves and say everything is fine, but the plunge keeps getting worse. Now, Deutsche Bank's stock price went up yesterday, but that was based on a rumor of a bond buyback by Deutsche Bank. Meanwhile, the German finance minister and bank chief is out there saying Deutsche is rock solid, there's nothing to worry about, and the Titanic is unsinkable. And humans are causing global warming here. But the reality is that, and we're seeing this being reported in Patriot Rising, investors have completely lost faith in Deutsche Bank. And this is coming from one of the top 10 shareholders in Deutsche Bank. They're not sure about it, and the markets are now pricing Deutsche Bank debt at junk levels. They're trying to get out of it and reduce their exposure on this. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog, fears of a Deutsche Bank bubble bursting and a global contagion to banks. It's a huge derivatives exposure. They're calling it a derivatives Ponzi. This is coming from Bix Weir. Deutsche Bank is on the verge of taking down the entire global system. And the problem is too much debt. That gigantic 11th marble is returning to Earth, and it's already bigger than the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. Got to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We seem to have our tech issues finally sorted out around here. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about tremendous concern over Deutsche Bank. And because of those credit default swaps and other derivatives linking all these banks together could be a major hiccup. And the news is not reporting on it because they don't want you going down closing out your savings account. They're going to need your money to try and make it all better. Politicians aren't talking about it because there's nothing they can do. And it all comes down to, here in the United States of America, 100 years ago, little over 100 years ago, a corrupted Congress and a corrupted president sold the people of the United States back into the slavery of the same predatory banking system we fought the revolution to be free of, knowing that somewhere down the road, after they had lived their lives of wealth and comfort and privilege and had gone to their graves happy, that it would all fall apart. And that's what's happening right now. The Swiss National Bank is saying that it will be posting an annual loss of $23 billion, with a B, for 2015, largely due to losses in foreign exchange transactions. Story coming out of Zero Hedge. As Goldman risk explodes, they have their derivatives exposure. The president, Gary Cohn, is saying no one should question the viability of U.S. banks. How dare you doubt? It's sort of a reminder of something I've observed many times. Banking isn't a science. It's a religion. It's a set of arbitrary rules made up to benefit the clergy, meaning the bankers. And it only works because you've been brainwashed to believe this is how it's supposed to be. But anybody who's involved in investment and finance understands doubt and questions are part of the business. When you're evaluating a potential investment, anywhere that you're going to put your money, you have a right to ask questions and about if it's going to work out. You have a right to doubt. That's just common sense. And here we have the president of Goldman Sachs is out there saying, how no one should question the viability. We're in great shape here. The banks are sound. That kind of a declarative statement to me is a red warning flag. Over at Patriot Rising, the return of crisis. Suddenly, banks everywhere are in deep, deep trouble. And they're basically saying one of the reasons we're in the mess today is following 2008, nobody changed the banking system except Iceland. And the debt has continued to grow, and they can't service it any longer because debt eventually strangles economic activity, and without economic activity, the debt itself cannot be serviced anymore. It's a death spiral. And it all goes back to that model of private central banks being allowed to loan the public currency into circulation at interest. It's a great scam for the bankers. The families that own these banks are trillionaires several times over. They don't let their names get put on these Forbes list of the top 100 billionaires or whatever. But that's what's going on here. They've been playing this scam on planet Earth for 300 years. And they're doing great, and the rest of us are suffering under it. And it is time to rethink how we run a nation's economy. We need to go back to the system that worked for the young United States of America. Government-issued value-based currency, no private central banks, only depositor banks. And I got a nasty letter the other day from somebody saying, we have to go out and kill all the bankers, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you need to remember there are two types of banks that we're looking at. And the first are the depositor banks. That's the model of banking where we were all taught in school. You put money into the bank in a savings account. The bank pools it together and loans it out for economic development in your community. They charge interest on it, and they split the interest with the savings account holders. And that is a very useful system for organizing the wealth of the community as a whole. What we're angry about is this other system, and it calls itself a bank, but it isn't really. Just like the Federal Reserve isn't really part of the federal government. They just adopted the name to sort of conceal what they're doing. It's a legalized counterfeiting operation. They're allowed to just create money out of thin air, which they loan into circulation at interest. And slowly, through privatization and corruption, they acquire the real hard assets of the nation, and all it costs them was ink, paper, or numbers typed into a computer. It is a scam. And they get away with it because politicians are willing to sell you into their slavery for $1. Another article coming out of the Daily Mail. Are we on the brink of a new banking crisis? UK's biggest lenders see more than £40 billion wiped off their value this year. And it's even worse for the banks over on the continent. Citigroup has dropped by more than 27%. Bank of America down by 28%. Morgan Stanley 25%. These are unsustainable degrees of losses. Right now, the only part of the financial system that's actually doing well are companies that deal with bankruptcy and restructuring. They're in boom times. They've got more work than they know what to do with, and they're raking in the dough hand over fist here. Now, the CEO of Maersk, which is the world's largest shipping company, is already out there saying it's going to be worse than 2008. And they're looking at the total tonnage being shipped around the world, and it's not there. Because people don't have the money to go down to the shopping malls and buy products. So the shopping malls aren't ordering new products from the manufacturers. The manufacturers aren't making new products. They don't need raw materials. So they drop the orders for the raw material. And the whole system grinds to a stop. And that's what's going on here. Peter Schiff is out there with Greg Hunter over at Financial Survival Network saying that gold is going to smell blood in this push to negative rates. Yeah, of course it will. People are going to want to take their money out of a savings account if the savings account is actually taking some of that money from them. I find it amazing that Europeans first and soon Americans are actually okay with this idea of, I'm going to put my money in a savings account in the bank, and instead of the bank paying me money to use my money, I got to pay the bank some of my money for the bank to use my money. Plus the risk of bail-ins, that they'll just grab all of it if they need it. I don't understand why people haven't emptied their savings account, put it into gold and silver or some other store of value. Now, do you remember Harry Markopolos? He was the guy who tried for year after year after year to get the Securities and Exchange Commission to go look at Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. And the SEC inspectors who went on over there didn't take a close look. They handed Bernie their resumes. They wanted to get in on the party. But finally, when it all fell apart and Harry Markopolos was vindicated and Bernie made off with the loot, went off to prison, where I understand he's got had a relationship going there with Jonathan Pollard, the Israeli spy. But Markopolos is telling ABC News that he's found 3 new Ponzi schemes inside America's financial system. They're multi-billion-dollar pyramids of fraud, one of them larger than Bernie Madoff had, and that was $65 billion. And once again, if Markopolos is proven right, it shows that the Securities and Exchange Commission simply isn't doing their job. They're just there to make it look like the government is keeping an eye on the financial systems for you. But they don't really, just like the Minerals Management Service wasn't really looking at the Deepwater Horizon. Gary Schilling is out there saying an all-out price war could send oil down another $20 per barrel. That will be the end to a large number of oil producers, distributors, and their support companies as well. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy and some very alarming signs on the horizon, which you are not being told of by the corporate media. Story coming out of Zero Hedge, talking about something that came out of a Morgan Stanley presentation. It was supposed to be a closed session, but somebody inside kind of leaked the goodies. And basically what was being discussed as policy in this Morgan Stanley group was that the financial system has to move as quickly as they can to ban all cash so that they can introduce negative interest rates way below -1%. In other words, to be able to loot your savings account as much as they feel like, and you have no choice but to leave your money in there. And I guarantee you, when they ban cash, they're also going to ban silver and gold ownership. Anything that could store value will be banned to you. They will own all the money. You're only allowed to have as much of it as you need to keep yourself alive and go to work the next day. J.P. Morgan is out there with a forecast saying that the European Central Bank is looking at cutting their rates to -4.5%, Bank of Japan to -3.45%, and the Federal Reserve to -1.3%. It doesn't matter what technical terms they put it in. They're basically going to be looting their own depositors and customers to keep themselves going a little bit longer. Now, I want to talk about these payday loan companies. They are little more than glorified loan sharks. But finally, public outcry is forcing a reaction, and payday lender Mosley just got indicted for wire fraud and other charges. And Mosley is this payday lender who targets poor people in the U.S. They had 620,000 victims, and they were being charged interest rates of more than 700%. That is loan sharking. And they were indicted in New York on charges including collection of unlawful debts and wire fraud. Richard Mosley Sr., the boss, was charged by a New York grand jury. It's open season on honest people and their money and their possessions and their wealth. The last official act of any government is to loot the nation. We have a coffee cup at our online store. You can buy that. Because I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to start to appreciate the wisdom of that simple sentence here. London's dirty secret. This is coming out of Blacklisted News. The British capital, primarily that London Financial Center, which is kind of its own little enclave like the Vatican. They're the global center for money laundering. When you are hearing about the government going after somebody for laundering drug money or terror money, it's like the war on drugs. They're going after the competition. The protected drug trade continues. The protected money laundering continues. They just want to get rid of the competition because competition drives down the profits. Meanwhile, over at HSBC, families of U.S. citizens who were killed by Mexican drug cartels are now mounting a lawsuit against HSBC because of the recent admission that HSBC was laundering drug money for these Mexican drug cartels. I think they also ought to turn around and sue the U.S. government for providing the guns to the Mexican drug cartels, some of which have come back into the United States of America and been used to kill American citizens. Now, over at the IMF, Christine Lagarde is out there saying that they've really reached the end of how much money they can pour onto Ukraine. Ukraine cannot pay it back, and Christine Lagarde is making an issue over the intense corruption going on in Kiev, which has actually led to the resignation of members of the government simply storming on out there and saying this is hopelessly corrupt. Everybody's just out there grabbing stuff. The country is not being run. And Christine Lagarde is about ready to pull the plug, and that will be the end of Kiev. Now, a few months ago, the Australian media, Australian government, had come out with really glorious, glowing job numbers. It made it look like Australia's, economy had turned around, things are booming, and a lot of people were saying the numbers didn't make sense, just like they don't make sense here in the United States of America. And by the way, I'm glad that Donald Trump came on out and said that 4.9% unemployment number is an absolute joke, because it is. But apparently today, Australia's Treasury Secretary John Fraser, testifying before a parliamentary committee, admitted that, the job numbers may have been overstated, but it's not like anybody was lying. There was just a technical glitch. that led to the overstatement of the numbers here. Now, if you are a movie buff or a movie historian or in any way involved in that industry, as I was for much of my life, you know the name, the Pinewood Studios over in Great Britain. Iconic place. A lot of important historical films were shot there. 2001, A Space Odyssey. Most of the James Bond movies are shot at Pinewood. A lot of Star Wars was shot at Pinewood. Unfortunately, they've now had to put the studio up for sale. And I hope the new owners will treat it the way it deserves. I remember when Universal Studios was sold, and this Japanese company came on in, and they tried to get a handle on all the shenanigans going on with the money, and they could never get a grip on it. And they finally wound off selling it again here. We've been talking a lot about Iceland, and it is important for people to understand what happened in Iceland, because that 2008 meltdown from the mortgage-backed security fraud hit Iceland very hard. It was the subject of a documentary, Inside Job, that won the Academy Award for Best Documentary and then promptly vanished to be replaced by this made-for-the-purpose HBO movie that tried to make all the American financial players look like they were heroes dealing with an unfortunate situation, and that was absolutely not what was going on. So Iceland got into serious trouble. Unemployment soared, the currency crashed, and their Icelandic stock market was pretty much wiped out. But unlike the rest of the world, which looted the people to try and give the bankers a second chance to reform themselves, which never happened, the Icelandic government allowed its three major banks to collapse. And it went after the criminal bankers, and it's thrown a bunch of them in jail. They even put the country's ex-prime minister, Gerhard, was put on trial, becoming the first world leader to face criminal prosecution arising from the economic crash of 2008. And Iceland has written off a large amount of the debt that was created through fraud and dumped on the Icelandic people. And you don't hear about it because it worked for the people of Iceland and for the country, just not for the bankers. And we don't report anything that makes the bankers look bad. They're holy and sacrosanct here. But the world ought to look at Iceland very carefully, because we've got a big kaboinga coming, and I think we need to rethink how we're going to respond to it. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the economy. Now, there's yet another U.S. company, Carrier, which is a ventilation air conditioning manufacturer. They announced today they are going to close their manufacturing facility in western Indianapolis, and they are moving to Mexico. Total loss of U.S. jobs, 1,400. Now, Amazon is making a move to try and buy back their own stock. They're going to spend $5 billion on it. And usually when a company is buying their stock back, they're expecting something dramatic down the road. Now, for some companies, they'll buy their own stock back ahead of announcing a new product that they know is going to be a hot seller, because then the stock price goes up, they can resell it, they make money on that end as well. But we see a lot of companies trying to pull back their public exposure. Remember, the Deutsche Bank stock surge yesterday was on rumors of a bond buyback. They're trying to basically go back to being private if they can, or at least to some extent here. Story out of Investment Watch blog, what are New York officials hiding about the failure of the biggest Obamacare co-op? And they're talking about Health Republic, which collapsed last fall, and all of a sudden 210,000 New Yorkers didn't have health coverage any longer. Now, an investigative reporter is trying to dig into this, but keeps running into brick walls. The latest one is a rejection by the New York Department of Financial Services. And there seems to be some kind of a cover-up. And a lot of these Obamacare co-ops have collapsed. Obamacare is just a major, major disaster. All right, we're going to grab a couple more phone calls here. Tom in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Sorry, this actually isn't about the economy because of the crumbling infrastructure. I just now had the internet come back on. I haven't had it on all day. But real quick, and I'm not sure if you touched on this, but are you aware of Vermin Supreme placing 4th in the New Hampshire primary?
No. Which party was Vernon in?
It's a Vermin, like Vermin as in a rat.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Was this somebody's idea of a joke?
Well, he's actually been running for every single Democratic primary for probably about the past 20 years.
Okay.
And he wears a boot on his head, and he does.
Oh, yeah, I know who this guy is. Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I had a joke. I still have a joke campaign going this year for Rivero 2016. It could hardly do any worse. And we have a web page and buttons and everything. In fact, I got a photo of somebody who actually wore a Rivero 2016 button to the Iowa caucuses.
Ah, good deal.
Yes.
Well, it's going to be a toss up with who gets my right, and it's either going to be you or Vermin Supreme. So you have a 50-50 shot right now.
Well, listen, don't write me in here because you know I get nasty letters from the election commissions about trying to get that white off of those touch screens for the electronic voting machines. Okay.
Well, Vermin Supreme it is. Keep up the good work.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch here to Ralph in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How you doing? Calling from New York City, like always. Mike, one question. Do you think we're going to have a Patrick Henry-style revolution in this country the way this election is going down now?
I don't know about a Patrick Henry-style revolution, and again, I understand there needs to be a change. I'm opposed to a violent revolution because if there's one thing the U.S. government is really good at, it's killing people. But I think, again, that what we're going to see is a big economic crash. It's going to destroy Wall Street, and the federal government will collapse with it. It's going to basically look at the former Soviet Union and how they fell apart. And they had to get through a couple of months of real hardship, and then they formed the Russian republics, and life is a lot better. And I think we're going to have to do the same thing here in the United States and avoid giving the government any excuse to declare a dictatorship and martial law and preserve their wealth and privilege and power through that means. So I really think it's headed that way. The only matter is when, at what point. But I understand there's a lot of people who are really very, very angry, and we're seeing more and more articles start to appear, some of them even in the corporate media, literally saying we're in a pre-revolution mode in the United States of America right now.
Well, I'm just kind of curious because you think this is the final countdown of this election year. You see it now. You think this is the final battle with all these rigged elections going on here now. They did it in the other states. Do you think a Microsoft-style hack will happen in another state?
Well, I mean, Microsoft is suspected in Iowa. We know that all of these electronic voting machines are wide open for fraud. I think what is revolutionary for this election season is up until now, most Americans still had the illusion the elections were honest and fair and accurate, and all of a sudden it is just being rubbed right in their face. No, that's not the case. And even when election rigging doesn't steal the election for the preferred candidate, they use party chicanery. I mean, look what they just did to Bernie Sanders in New Hampshire. Clearly the runaway victor in the Democratic primary up there, and they still finagled away for Hillary Clinton to wind up with 2 more delegates.
Talking about Bernie Sanders, it's a joke the way he met with Al Sharpton this morning here in New York City. I said, oh my God, what does Al Sharpton and Bernie Sanders have in common? They're pandering the black vote. I said, oh, give me a break.
Well, you know, Bernie's a politician. Again, Al Sharpton, for all of his faults, and he has many, he still does have a very, very strong following. Al Sharpton, runs his life, again, the personality cult model. And that's a very dangerous thing. There is something in the human psyche where we are just drawn into, this personality that we will attach to, possibly as a replacement for a parent or something. But most of the worst dictatorships in history involved a central figure who was a personality cult. The good news being that when that personality cult went away, the whole shebang would collapse. That's why Spain hid the death of Franco for as long as they did, because they understood once everybody knew Franco was dead, support for the government was going to evaporate because it was all based on a personality cult.
It's amazing because me living in New York City, it's an ultra-liberal state of the world. It's like California. It's like, they all looking for a solution. Like, you know, the rest of the country would be like New Yorkers or Californians, and so a lot of them all moving to Texas. You know, for better opportunities in business. And say, oh God, I'm moving out of New York. I can't stand the taxes and Ultra Bill de Blasio, the commie and the liberal New Yorkers.
All right. Well, you know, I lived in California for a while. The last time I was in New York, I actually enjoyed it. 9/11 really did transform the New York psyche. And it doesn't match that harsh, cruel stereotype that you still see in TV and movies. The New Yorkers I encountered on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, much mellower, a lot more, you know, willing to just, you know, treat people with respect. And it actually was a very pleasant experience. Anyway, listen, I need to let you...
Mike, you're beautiful. Thank you.
All right, thanks. We got to let you go here. And we're going to go to Randy in Texas. Aloha, Randy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, you just read that article about the plant in Indy shutting down, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I worked for Carrier Corporation at the Tyler, Texas plant for 30 years when they NAFTA'd our jobs out. And I'll go ahead and give you a little apocryphal story about that.
It's going to have to be fast.
They came down to tell us that they were going to ship our jobs to Mexico. Our business agent for the union went to them and said, okay, if we accept minimum wage, will y'all keep the plant here? And they basically said no.
Yeah, we're hearing about that more and more. It's such a short-sighted policy because your employees are also ultimately your customers, you know, for the economy as a whole. Randy, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We're going to take one more phone call when we come back for the final segment of our show. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today. We're going to take one final phone call. Has been waiting very, very patiently, and that is David in California. David, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. You know, I was listening to an interview with Greg Palast a few days ago, and when I heard you talking about the projected theft of the election, what Greg is have you ever interviewed him, Greg Palast?
I don't know if I've had him on the show or not, but I've certainly posted a lot of his stuff. He writes a lot of good material.
Yeah, he wrote the book Best Democracy Money Can Buy.
Yes.
And what he describes coming up to be very similar to what happened in Florida in 2000. And basically, what the GOP and the con artists are doing, because there are some corrupt Democrats in this too. They're basically finding common names, like Joe Smith. And if there's a Joe Smith that committed a crime in Florida, in a fraud or something that would get you with
they're kicking the people off the voter list, and they did that in Florida in 2000. It was a big stink here, and there are some states now that are looking at laws that say once you've served your time in prison and you are released, your voting rights are restored.
Yeah, well, in this case, if they find a Joe Smith that did a crime in 1922, they're going to take off hundreds of other Joe Smiths.
Yes.
And what Palast is also alleging is that if there's a very common Muslim name, Abdul, and so they're claiming that if Abdul is registered in California, they can take Abdul off in Colorado, New York, Florida, even without a felony.
Well, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting because, in theory, we're all being required to conform to this national ID card via our driver's license, and yet we have all these elections across the country where they're still fighting over whether we have to show ID or not to prove that we're not the guy who committed the felony back in 1922, because I wasn't even alive back then.
Yeah, well, I'd recommend if you can get Greg as a...
All right, I'll try and get him on the show. I'll try and get him on the show.
He showed how there was a company in Florida in 2000 called ChoicePoint.
Yes.
And ChoicePoint had an inaccuracy rate of 94%.
Yes.
They were taking Joe Smiths off. If they found a Joe Smith in Montana that committed a crime in 1922, they would take him off they would take a Joe Smith off the Florida rolls.
Well,
they would find Democrats because this was Choice Point was working for Jeb Bush down in Florida, and Catherine, what's her name? I've forgotten her name. She was
Harris.
Catherine Harris, right. And so they were specifically targeting Democrats, but in this case, they're going after Muslims and blacks and this company, Choice Point, after Bush got elected, so-called elected in 2000, Choice Point went on to get the biggest contract from Homeland Security. So not only were they doing it in Florida, they did it in the other 50 states, the rest of the 50 states, plus military worldwide. So they were able to disenfranchise people all over the country and world, U.S. voters, through this Choice Point company, and Choice Point ended up with the biggest Homeland Security contract. So now you can imagine what the database is 16 years later of Choice Point. These people they have no loyalty to America. They're just traitors.
No, it's whoever's giving them the biggest paycheck is going to do it. Anyway, listen, David, I need to let you go. We're down to the end of the show, and I got to get a couple more stories out here before the end of the day. All right? So thank you very much for that, and we're going to close the phone lines and get on back to the news here. I have so much left to talk about. We had a lot of calls, which is fun, and I enjoyed it, plus our late start, so I'll be taking a lot of this material into tomorrow's show. But a couple of things. Former CEO of Morgan Stanley, John Mack, was being interviewed on Bloomberg television, and he was asked about this coming crisis with Deutsche Bank. And he came on back and saying, Deutsche Bank is solid, they're good for every penny, Deutsche Bank is fine. And Bloomberg TV asked him, why do you say that? And Max said, it'll be bailed out by the German government. It doesn't matter how badly Deutsche Bank screws up, the government of Germany will go out to the German people and take their money and give it to the banks so they can go on making the same mistakes and paying themselves huge bonuses just a teensy bit longer. I don't know if the German people are really going to be very happy with that, but that's been the model, going all the way back to the S&L bailout from the elder Bush. Your financial institutions are safe because we'll just loot the people to cover the losses, and that is fascism. If you want to look for an official start of fascist economic policy in the United States of America, you go back to the S&L bailout, because that set the model. Your money, your business money is safe in the United States. If you make money, you get to keep it. And if there are any losses, the taxpayers will be forced to pay it. Now, there's another bubble starting to grow, and this has to do with car loans. Because we're starting to see a delay, late payment default rate climb up on that. More people are falling at least 2 months behind on their car payments, according to a new report that came out yesterday. It's up 11.5% from the same quarter last year. And it's the highest rate of missed payment and default since it started keeping track back in 2006. You cannot run an economy based on debt. It will not last. It can't last. There is a structural problem, but the private central bankers love debt-based economy because it winds up putting the real wealth of the nation in their pocket. Now, over in Texas, the billionaire owner of the NFL, Stan Kroenke, and his Walmart heiress wife just bought a ranch that went for $725 million. And in terms of sheer acreage, it is actually bigger than the city of Los Angeles. 535,000 acres. The W.T. Wagner Ranch in Texas. And something tells me that we're not going to see the Bureau of Land Management over bothering these people anytime soon trying to steal their land. It's only the little ranchers that have to surrender their land. So, let's see. Getting on back here. Well, let's get in. I'm going to skip on back here to some of the stuff with the war. NATO is going to continue their deployment of Patriot missile batteries in Turkey. Everybody is arming up. They want a new world war to cover up this economic crash that's coming. Because if the economy implodes and they don't have an evil Russian or evil China to blame for it, The American people are going to point the finger of blame where it rightly deserves to go. Wall Street corruption, private central banking, aided and abetted by Washington, D.C. They don't have anybody else to blame unless they can get a big bloody war going. Now, as you know, Turkey is trying to force the U.S. to make a choice. Turkey goes on acting as its proxy in Syria, or the U.S. can care about the Kurds, one or the other. Erdogan may have overstepped his bounds because the Kurds are part of the U.S. strategic plan, because the ultimate goal is to shrink Turkey by a little bit and shrink Syria by a little bit and shrink Iraq by a little bit to make them weaker by creating a new country, Kurdistan. They're going to carve it out of that. And the Syrian Kurds are already opening missions in the United States and the European Union, leading to the establishment of a new nation for themselves, carved out of segments of the other. Remember, what Israel's goal in the Middle East is, and the U.S. is doing for them, is to take the big, powerful countries and break them into little tiny pieces, like Iraq and ultimately Iran. That's what they want to do. Up in Ukraine, there's apparently a major desertion problem. Due to starvation and poor conditions, the Ukrainian soldiers are just dropping their guns and they're just leaving. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Start telling everybody about the obvious vote fraud and party machine chicanery that just stole New Hampshire away from Bernie Sanders. We need to educate Americans about election fraud so they recognize it when they see it. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.